6 months from now, the boardroom at Ashford Aviation would smell like fear and mahogany polish. 12 men and women in tailored suits would sit frozen around a glass conference table, while Catherine Ashford stood at the head, her Armani blazer wrinkled for the first time in her professional life, mascara smudged beneath eyes that hadn't slept in 3 days. Beside her, Victoria Hayes from the Federal Aviation Administration would flip through 237 pages of evidence with the methodical precision of someone who'd built entire careers on patience. And through the door would walk a man Catherine had dismissed as invisible. 6 months earlier, Marcus Steele, no longer in janitor's coveralls, but in a charcoal suit that fit like authority, an FAA aviation safety inspector badge clipped to his belt. Victoria's voice would carry the weight of federal consequence. Ashford, do you recognize this man? Catherine's face would drain of color so completely that Harold Brennan, the 72-year-old board chairman, would later tell his wife it looked like watching a ghost realize it was dead. The flashback would hit Catherine with physical force 6 months earlier, her own voice echoing through the hangar. You push mops. You exist because I allow it. But understanding how a janitor became a federal inspector required going back to the beginning. To the morning when Marcus Steele woke at 5:15 in a studio apartment in North Las Vegas, the red past due notice from Nevada Energy glaring at him from the kitchen table like an accusation. $127. The kind of number that shouldn't break a man, except when that man had $68.23 in his checking account and a daughter whose gap-toothed smile was currently visible through the crack in the bathroom door as she brushed her teeth with concentration that would have made surgeons jealous. Maya Steele, 8 years old, all elbows and pigtails, in questions that didn't have easy answers. She emerged from the bathroom wearing the purple NASA t-shirt Marcus had found at Goodwill, holding a half-finished science fair project made from popsicle sticks in dreams. Dad, when will we have enough money for real supplies? Emma's dad bought her a 3D printer. The question landed like a punch wrapped in innocence. Marcus flipped pancakes that were more air than substance, stretching the Bisquick mix with extra water, the way his own mother had done when he was Maya's age. He kissed her forehead, breathing in the strawberry shampoo from the dollar store. Soon, baby, your dreams are bigger than the sky. Her grin could have powered the Vegas Strip. Bigger than the sky. 20 minutes later, Marcus sat in his 2008 Honda Civic, 157,000 miles, check engine light, permanently illuminated driver's side window that only rolled down 3/4, watching Maya skip into the school building. Mrs. Patterson, the neighbor who watched Maya before and after school for $200 a month, Marcus could barely afford, waved from the entrance. The internal monologue started before Marcus could stop it, Denise's voice mixing with his own thoughts, like they'd done for the 6 years since her death. Denise used to say he had a hero complex. Marcus, you can't save everyone. But after she died in that shuttle bus accident breaks, that management had ignored replacing for 8 months despite 3 separate mechanic reports, all documented, all filed, all dismissed as budget constraints. Marcus learned something fundamental about the architecture of tragedy. You didn't save everyone by staying silent. You saved them by documenting, by building cases so airtight that even the most expensive lawyers couldn't find oxygen. The drive to Ashford Aviation took 17 minutes through industrial Henderson, past warehouse districts, where the American dream came to punch a clock. Marcus clocked in at 6:53, 7 minutes early, like always nodding to Maggie Williams at the custodial supervisor desk. Maggie was 58, with hands weathered from 12 years of night shifts, 3 grandchildren whose photos she kept in a plastic sleeve in her work vest, and the kind of tired that came from watching too much and saying too little. Heads up, Marcus. Boss lady's in a mood. Board meeting went sideways last night. Marcus collected his supplies, mop bucket, industrial cleaner that smelled like fake pine, and chemical promises, the yellow caution sign that people ignored approximately 94% of the time based on his informal observations. The hangar stretched before him, 70,000 square feet of polished concrete and aviation dreams. 12 helicopters in various states of maintenance mechanics crawling over them like ants on a picnic. The Augusta Westland A-39 near Bay 3 caught his eye immediately. Not because it was beautiful, though $12 million bought a certain aesthetic, but because of the hydraulic fluid pooling beneath the tail rotor assembly in a pattern Marcus recognized from 6,000 hours of aircraft maintenance training at Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works division. Metal fatigue. The mounting bracket showed microfractures visible even from 15 feet away if you knew what to look for. And Marcus knew what to look for. The flashback came in fragments, Grainy like old film, his Lockheed badge photo from 2006, fresh out of MIT with a master's degree and enough naive optimism to believe systems worked. 12 years of classified programs, stealth helicopter, avionics flight control systems for drones that didn't officially exist. Then the supervisor's office in 2018, the manila folder sliding across the desk with termination stamped in red. Marcus, you're done, effective immediately. Ethics violation. I reported a safety flaw. People could die. Sign the NDA or we press charges, your choice. The title card in his memory read, former senior aerospace engineer fired for whistleblowing. Below it in smaller text that only appeared later, 2 Navy technicians would die in 2020 because Lockheed buried the report. Marcus pulled the clipboard from his cart, the one he'd bought with his own money, industrial-grade waterproof, and began documenting. Hydraulic fluid type, volume, spread, pattern, ambient temperature, time of observation. The mechanics near Bay 5 glanced over but said nothing. Janitors were furniture, invisible infrastructure. Catherine Ashford made her entrance at 2:43 in the afternoon like a storm system with a law degree. The Louboutin heels announced her before she cleared the door or each step against concrete, precise as gunfire. 12 employees materialized behind her in a wake of nervous energy office staff dispatchers, mechanics who'd been pulled from actual work to witness whatever public execution she had planned. She stopped 10 feet from Marcus, her Hermes scarf probably worth more than his monthly rent, and the temperature in the hangar dropped 10 degrees. You, the janitor, did you touch my aircraft? Marcus straightened slowly, clipboard in hand, meeting her eyes with the kind of calm that came from having survived worse. No, ma'am. I was documenting damage for maintenance records. The hydraulic fluid pooling beneath the stabilizer suggests a ruptured line in the tail rotor assembly. If someone attempts to fly this aircraft without, stop talking like you understand aviation. She circled him the way predators circled prey, establishing territory, demonstrating dominance for an audience that had seen this performance before with other targets. Everyone watched. 12 people who would later claim they hadn't noticed anything unusual, who would tell HR they'd been focused on their own tasks, who would develop convenient amnesia about what happened next. Let me explain something to you. You push mops, you empty bins, you exist in this facility because I allow it. The coded language came wrapped in professionalism, never quite crossing legal lines, but landing with the weight of every microaggression Marcus had absorbed in 42 years of breathing while black in America. Catherine picked up his clipboard, reading his notes with theatrical disdain, metal fatigue visible on mounting bracket. Where'd you learn that? YouTube. Brennan Cole, the chief operating officer, 44 years old, ex-Navy officer who'd traded one hierarchy for another, added his contribution with a laugh that sounded rehearsed. Boss janitors noticed trash in toilets. That's it. Marcus kept his voice level, his hands loose at his sides, his posture unthreatening, in the way he'd learned by the time he was 12. Ma'am, I'm just trying to... Ew. You're trying to play engineer. Some single father with a GED telling me who inherited a $47 million company about hydraulic systems. The threat came dressed in concern, delivered loud enough for the entire hangar to hear, "Get your cleaning cart. Get out of my hangar. If I see you near my aircraft again, you're fired before your daughter's MIT tuition bill comes due." The silence that followed had texture. Everyone knew about Maya, about Marcus working 3 jobs the year before until Ashford Aviation hired him full-time, about the gifted program application pending at her school, about dreams that cost $400 Marcus didn't have. He set the clipboard on the nearest workbench with deliberate gentleness, the kind of control that came from knowing violence was always an option and choosing documentation instead. Walked toward the service exit without looking back, without arguing, without giving them the satisfaction of seeing him flinch. The internal dialogue cycled through Denise's voice like a prayer or a warning. Walk away, Marcus. You've got Maya to think about. But the helicopter remained and the hydraulic line remained, and the physics of catastrophic failure at 30,000 feet remained regardless of who documented them. If Marcus walked away and it crashed, if some passenger died because he chose silence over conflict, he'd be complicit in creating another widow, another orphaned child. He'd be the man who killed someone else's Denise. 15 minutes proved Marcus right with the kind of cosmic irony that would have been funny if lives hadn't hung in the balance. Catherine boarded the helicopter at 3 p.m. sharp, phone pressed to her ear as she coordinated with Mitchell Barnes, her attorney, about creating a paper trail for Marcus's termination. Kevin Santos, the pilot, 56 years old, 20 years with the company, commendations filling an office wall, hesitated at the controls with the instinct of someone who'd survived 2 decades by trusting his gut. Boss, maybe we should have maintenance check that line first. Catherine's patience had limits measured in quarterly earnings. How long for pre-flight? Standard protocol is 15 minutes. Make it 10. I have a client in Palm Springs in 90 minutes. Kevin started his checklist while Catherine continued her call. Mitchell, I want Marcus Steele written up. Insubordination, overstepping authority, disrupting operations. The explosion wasn't dramatic. No fireball, no Hollywood spectacle. Just a sharp crack as the hydraulic line failed exactly where Marcus had worn crimson fluid, spraying across white epoxy flooring in an arterial burst that turned Catherine's $1,200 shoes into abstract art. The helicopter settled 3 inches as the stabilizer system lost pressure. Kevin went pale, his hands frozen on controls that would have killed them both if they'd been airborne. If Catherine had been 30,000 feet above desert instead of 3 feet above concrete. Nobody said it out loud, didn't need to. The math was simple and terrible. Ruptured hydraulic line plus altitude plus physics equaled NTSB investigation and closed caskets. Rodriguez, a mechanic with 23 years in aviation maintenance, muttered to Maggie Williams. The janitor was right. Maggie crossed herself, a reflex from childhood Sunday school that had outlived her faith in institutions. He saved her life, she don't even know it. Catherine's response came wrapped in fury, masquerading as administrative efficiency. She found Brennan Cole near the parts cage, her voice controlled the way avalanches were controlled barely. I want Marcus Steele off night shift. Put him on 4 a.m. to noon rotation, weekends mandatory. Cut his hours to 32. And create a paper trail, insubordination, disrupting operations, overstepping authority. Brennan opened his mouth, some vestigial conscience stirring. Boss, he was trying to... Did I ask your opinion? No, ma'am. The email arrived on Marcus's phone at 11:47 p.m. while he sat at the kitchen table in his studio apartment, Maya asleep on the pull-out couch they shared, because one-bedroom places started at $1,100 a month and might as well have been on Mars for all the accessibility they offered. The ThinkPad T480 on the table, kept from his Lockheed days, encrypted with protocols that would have impressed cybersecurity professionals, hummed quietly as Marcus opened the folder labeled Ashford Evidence 2021-2024. 847 files organized with the precision of someone who'd spent 12 years on classified defense programs. Photos with GPS metadata burned into the EXIF data. Voice memos recorded in public spaces where Nevada's one-party consent laws made them admissible. Emails copied from the office printer's recycling bin, technically abandoned property under Fourth Amendment doctrine. Every file named with dates and aircraft registration numbers. Every piece of evidence cross-referenced and backed up to 3 separate encrypted cloud storage accounts. July 14th, 2. Fuel contamination in aircraft N739DA. Rodriguez had warned about sediment in the tank. Brennan Cole's email response printed and photographed. Flush tank sign-off inspection. Client boards in 2 hours, no delays. November 3rd, 2023. Landing gear malfunction on N420 Vawu X. Pilot filed incident report citing mechanical issues. Brennan's internal memo blamed pilot error, closed the case without inspection, kept the aircraft in rotation. January 19th, 2024. Inspection records forged while mechanic Wallace was out sick. Someone had signed Wallace's name on 3 different maintenance logs. Marcus had photos of Wallace's real signature from earlier documents. The forgeries weren't even good. September 22nd, 2024. Today's hydraulic incident. Marcus's warning ignored, documented, and nearly fatal. 73 violations total across 3 years, a pattern that would make federal prosecutors salivate if they ever saw it, which raised the question of why Marcus had collected evidence for 3 years without using it, a question that required understanding the architecture of his previous destruction. The schedule change email glowed on his phone screen like an epitaph, effective immediately, 32 hours per week, 4 a.m. to noon, all weekends required. Marcus pulled out a sheet of paper, actual paper, because some calculations hurt more when written by hand, and did the math that would determine whether Maya ate regular meals or developed a taste for ramen and resilience. $875 for rent, $200 for utilities, $2,500 for Maya's STEM camp deposit due in 6 weeks, non-refundable, and she'd been talking about it for 3 months with the kind of excitement that made lying to her feel like theft. New weekly salary, $340. Math didn't care about effort or fairness or the gap between what Marcus deserved and what he'd receive. The automated phone call came at 11:52, Maya's school district, using a system that somehow made good news sound ominous. Congratulations, Maya Steele has qualified for the district's Gifted and Talented program. To confirm enrollment, please submit the $400 deposit by Friday, October 4th. Marcus stared at his phone, at the bills on the table, at his daughter sleeping with the kind of complete trust that children had before the world taught them otherwise. The contact list on his phone scrolled past names from another life, former Lockheed colleagues who'd stopped returning calls after his termination, MIT classmates who'd climbed corporate ladders while he mopped floors, distant relatives who'd offered thoughts and prayers, but never cash. One name stood out: Rachel Morrison, Washington Post investigative journalist, Pulitzer finalist 2010 for exposing defense contractor fraud. They'd worked together on the Lockheed case before everything imploded, before NDAs and legal threats and carefully worded termination letters that made whistleblowing sound like a character flaw. His thumb hovered over the call button. The last time he'd trusted the system, trusted that truth mattered, that evidence would protect him, that doing the right thing led to anything except unemployment and widowhood, and explaining to a 6-year-old why mommy wasn't coming home from the hospital, he'd lost everything. His career, Denise's health insurance during her final months of cancer treatment, the house they'd bought with dreams of stability, the naive faith that institutions rewarded integrity. But 2 Navy technicians had died in 2020 because Marcus had stopped fighting. Petty Officer James Rodriguez, 29, married with twin daughters. Airman Corey Washington, 24, engaged, planning a wedding that would never happen. Their deaths came from the GIC control system flaw Marcus had reported in 2018, the flaw Lockheed had buried along with his career, the flaw that proved silence was never neutral. It was always a choice with body counts. The internal monologue that kept him awake most nights cycled through its familiar pattern, Denise's voice mixing with his own thoughts, past and present bleeding together the way trauma did. She used to joke about his hero complex during their good years, back when MIT was recent and Lockheed was hiring. And the future felt like something they could plan for instead of survive. But after the shuttle bus accident, after Marcus watched his wife die from injuries that 3 mechanics had warned management about, after he held her hand in the ICU while she apologized for dying because medical debt was bankrupting them, he'd learned that heroes were just people who refused to accept that the world had to stay broken. You didn't save everyone by staying silent. You saved them by documenting, by building cases so airtight that even the best lawyers couldn't find oxygen, by becoming the kind of witness that prosecutors dreamed about and defense attorneys had nightmares over. You saved them by being so thoroughly, meticulously, undeniably right that the truth became inescapable. Marcus didn't call Rachel Morrison that night. Not yet. The timing wasn't ready, and timing mattered when you were playing chess against opponents who thought 3 moves ahead while sitting on board seats worth millions. Instead, he opened a new folder on his laptop, labeled it Catherine Ashford Profile, and began the kind of research that would have gotten him hired by any intelligence agency if he'd been willing to ask permission instead of beg forgiveness. Catherine Ashford, age 39. MBA from UCLA, inherited Ashford Aviation in 2022 after her father Richard died of a heart attack at 68. Richard had built the company from a single helicopter in '95, grew it to a fleet of 12, maintained a perfect safety record for 27 years through obsessive attention to maintenance and refusal to cut corners even when competitors did. Industry legend, the kind of founder who knew every mechanic by name and personally reviewed every inspection report. Catherine had taken over with something to prove to a board full of men, her father's age, men who'd watched her grow up at company barbecues and now questioned every decision she made. Revenue down 18% year over year, according to the quarterly reports Marcus found in the recycling bin. 3 board members pushing for her replacement. Insurance premiums increasing because the aviation industry was tightening regulations after a series of high-profile crashes. She wasn't evil. Marcus had seen enough genuine malice to know the difference. She was desperate, which made her dangerous in different ways. Desperate people made decisions they'd regret when the desperation passed, except by then, the decisions had body counts and federal charges. The question wasn't whether Catherine would retaliate harder. People like her always did, following predictable escalation patterns that Marcus had documented across enough cases to recognize the early warning signs. The question was whether Marcus could survive the retaliation long enough to finish building a case that would survive him. He needed more evidence, more witnesses, more documentation of the pattern, showing this wasn't isolated mistakes but systematic fraud, which meant he needed to stay employed at Ashford Aviation, despite Catherine's best efforts to push him out, needed to keep his head down, while simultaneously keeping his eyes open, needed to be simultaneously invisible and observant. The cognitive dissonance would have given him whiplash if he hadn't spent 6 years practicing it. Maya stirred on the pull-out couch, her voice thick with sleep. "Dad, you coming to bed?" Marcus closed his laptop, the evidence folders disappearing back into encryption. "Yeah, baby, just finishing up. Are we going to be okay?" The question every 8-year-old should never have to ask, delivered with the casual acceptance of children who'd learned that financial stability was provisional at best. "Yeah, Maya Bird, we're going to be okay. Promise." He climbed into the pull-out couch beside her, all elbows and knees, in a space designed for one person's dreams. "Promise, your dreams are bigger than the sky, remember." "Bigger than the sky," she murmured, already sliding back into sleep. Marcus stayed awake until 3 a.m., running calculations that didn't add up and making plans that required more luck than he had any right to expect. Somewhere in Henderson, Catherine Ashford probably slept soundly in a house with a mortgage worth more than Marcus would earn in a decade. Somewhere in Arlington, Rachel Morrison was investigating some other case building, some other story, unaware that the best source she'd ever worked with was about to re-enter her life. And somewhere in the encrypted files on Marcus's laptop, 847 pieces of evidence waited to become 848, then 900, then eventually the kind of documentation that changed industries and ended careers and prevented the next Denise from dying in a preventable accident. But first, Marcus needed to survive until morning. Needed to wake up at 5:15 and make pancakes and send Maya to school with a smile that convinced her everything was fine. Needed to show up at Ashford Aviation at 4 a.m. with his cleaning cart and his clipboard and his carefully maintained invisibility. Needed to keep documenting while Catherine Ashford made the fatal mistake of underestimating exactly who she'd humiliated in front of 12 witnesses. The consequences would take 6 months to fully materialize, but they'd already started. The moment Catherine dismissed Marcus's warning, the moment she chose her ego over his expertise, the moment she made it personal by threatening his daughter, she'd set a countdown in motion that would end in a boardroom with federal agents and evidence she couldn't explain away. Marcus just needed to survive long enough to see it. 3 days after the Target incident, Marcus received the email he'd been waiting for. Rachel Morrison had verified the first batch of his files, 73 violations cross-referenced against FAA records, former employee interviews confirming the pattern Catherine Ashford had spent 3 years building. Her text arrived at 11 p.m. on Friday, 6 weeks until publication. "Keep your head down." Marcus couldn't keep his head down. Not when Catherine's retaliation was already in motion, schedule cut to 32 hours, bills stacking higher than his checking account could reach. Not when Maya kept asking why they couldn't afford the gifted program, why other kids had things she didn't, why the woman at Target had looked at them like they were diseased. Monday morning brought the email that would change everything. Subject: employment status update. From hr@ashfordaviation.com. "Dear Mr. Steele, this email confirms the change to your employment status. Effective Monday, September 25th, 2024. You are hereby reassigned from custodial services to consultant position, quality assurance specialist. Compensation at $18,000 per month for a 6-month term. Please report to HR on Monday to complete onboarding paperwork." Marcus read it 5 times each pass, expecting the words to rearrange themselves into something that made sense. 18,000 monthly. More than he'd earned since Lockheed. Enough to solve every financial crisis, grinding him down enough to give Maya the childhood she deserved instead of the poverty she'd inherited. All Catherine wanted in exchange was his silence. His phone buzzed, Rachel calling. "Did you get an offer?" "How did you know?" "Because powerful people are predictable. They see someone who knows too much, and their first instinct is to buy them." "What did she offer?" 18,000 a month, 6-month contract, quality assurance specialist. Rachel whistled low through the connection. "That's serious money. What are you going to do?" Marcus looked at the bills on his kitchen table at Maya's bedroom door, where she slept with dreams too big for their apartment, at the laptop containing 847 files that could bring down a company or disappear into legal threats and destroyed credibility. "I'm going to take it. Smart. Document everything, every conversation, every instruction she gives you, every time she asks you to falsify a report or lie to investigators. You're not just building a whistleblower case anymore, Marcus. This is federal fraud territory." Rachel's voice shifted lower, more serious. "But you need to understand what you're walking into. Once you accept that money, will you start playing consultant while recording Catherine's crimes, there's no going back. If this falls apart, you're not just unemployed. You're potentially facing criminal charges yourself for fraud, for taking money under false pretenses. I'll do the job. Audit their maintenance properly, provide legitimate findings. When she asked me to lie in the report to falsify conclusions, that's when I document her committing fraud. You've thought this through. I had 3 years to think it through. Marcus hung up, stared at the email notification glowing on his phone. Accept or decline. Binary choice that felt like falling off a cliff in 2 different directions. Accept, and he became complicit in Catherine's cover-up, took money from a company whose negligence mirrored the negligence that had killed Denise. Decline, and he stayed poor, stayed powerless, stayed invisible while Catherine continued risking lives for quarterly profits. He typed his response before doubt could paralyze him. I accept the position and look forward to contributing to Ashford Aviation's safety standards. Professional, neutral. The kind of language consultants used when they were really thinking about how many ways this could destroy them. Sleep came in fragments that night. Marcus kept waking to phantom phone calls, imagined reporters asking questions he couldn't answer, Catherine's lawyers presenting evidence of fraud, while Maya watched her father led away in handcuffs. At 3 a.m. he gave up, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open to the folder he'd labeled Catherine Recordings. Empty now, waiting to be filled with evidence that would either vindicate him or bury him. Monday morning he dressed in the interview suit he'd pressed Sunday evening, the charcoal gray fabric that smelled like mothballs and the ghost of his Lockheed career. The shoulders hung loose. He'd lost weight these past 6 years, the kind of weight that came from choosing between groceries and electricity. Maya watched him from the kitchen table, cereal spoon paused halfway to her mouth. You look fancy. New job starting today. Like your old job. Before the janitor stuff, something like that. Are you going to make enough money so we can stay in the gifted program? Marcus knelt down to her level, adjusted the cheap glasses sliding down her nose. Yeah, baby. We're going to be okay. He meant it as reassurance, but it came out sounding like prayer. Ashford Aviation's parking lot looked different from the front entrance. For 3 years, Marcus had parked in the back corner, near the dumpsters, entered through the service door, existed in the spaces management didn't see. Now he pulled into visitor parking, walked through the main lobby with its polished floors and corporate art, felt the weight of eyes tracking him as he crossed toward the elevators. Karen Shepard met him in HR with paperwork and a smile that belonged on a mortician. She was 50s, gray hair severe, the kind of HR director who'd mastered the art of firing people while making them feel grateful for the opportunity. Mr. Steele, welcome to your new role. I have to say your background was quite surprising when it came across my desk. MIT and Lockheed Martin. That's significantly above our typical custodial hires. I needed work. Ashford was hiring. She slid the consultant agreement across her desk. Marcus read every word, knowing most of it was standard boilerplate designed to protect the company from consultants who might later claim they'd been employees deserving benefits. Section 7, subsection C was the poison pill. Contractor agrees to provide testimony and expert witness services as needed to support company position in any regulatory or legal proceedings. Translation: you'll lie for us if the FAA comes asking questions. He signed it anyway. Karen, a notarized, stamped, filed it in a folder that would probably live in a basement filing cabinet until the building burned down or the company dissolved, whichever came first. One more thing. She produced a separate document, single-page, dense legal text that Marcus recognized immediately. Non-disclosure agreement. The kind that came with teeth, $500,000 in penalties, 5 years imprisonment for violations. Standard corporate intimidation dressed up as legal protection. Marcus read it carefully. The NDA was ironclad, designed to prevent exactly what he was planning. But NDAs couldn't cover illegal activity. If Catherine asked him to falsify safety reports to lie to federal investigators, the NDA became void. Couldn't use it to conceal crimes. That was established case law, the kind of thing he'd researched obsessively after Lockheed had used his NDA as a weapon. He signed that too. Your office is 3rd floor, room 314. Facilities will bring up a computer and phone this afternoon. Catherine wants to meet with you at 10 to discuss immediate priorities. The building access badge she handed him had gold trim now, instead of the blue janitor badge he'd worn for 3 years. Same photo though, same face looking back with exhausted eyes that had seen too much and said too little. Room 314 was 12 by 10 window overlooking the hangar where that hydraulic line had ruptured a week ago. Desk, chair, filing cabinet, empty bookshelves waiting for the professional credentials he didn't have anymore because Lockheed had taken everything when they'd fired him. Marcus set up his personal laptop, the encrypted ThinkPad he'd kept isolated from any network since 2018. Created folders within folders. Catherine meetings nested inside consultant work, nested inside projects. Anyone who hacked his machine would have to dig through layers to find what mattered, and by then he'd have bigger problems than file organization. His phone buzzed, text from Maya sent from her classroom between lessons. "Dad, are we rich now?" He typed back, "Not rich, baby, but we're going to be okay." Her response came 30 seconds later. "Can I get new shoes?" "Mine have a hole." Marcus closed his eyes, felt shame burn through his chest. His daughter's shoes had holes, and he'd been so focused on exposing Catherine's negligence that he hadn't noticed. Father of the Year material. "Yes, this weekend we'll get you new shoes. Good ones." At 9:55, he walked to Catherine's office. Corner suite top floor view that probably cost more in monthly rent than Marcus's annual janitor salary. She sat behind a desk the size of a landing pad tablet and laptop and phone arranged like tactical equipment for corporate warfare. She didn't stand when he entered. "Marcus, glad you decided to accept our offer. I assume Karen walked you through the paperwork." "Yes, ma'am. Good. Let's be clear about expectations. I'm not paying you $18,000 a month for busy work. I need a comprehensive audit of our 4 Augusta Westland helicopters, full maintenance review, every system complete documentation of current status. That's a significant undertaking. 4 aircraft, all systems properly done. That's 6 weeks minimum. You have 3. Marcus kept his expression neutral, aware that his phone was recording this conversation through the app he'd configured to activate automatically within 50 feet of Catherine's office. Geofencing. The same technology stores use to send targeted ads repurposed for documentation. 3 weeks doesn't allow for thorough analysis of critical systems. If I miss something, you won't miss anything. You're MIT trained. Lockheed experienced. 3 weeks is generous. She rotated her tablet so he could read. FAA preliminary inquiry notice dated 4 days ago. Regional office requesting voluntary disclosure of maintenance records following anonymous safety complaint. The hydraulic incident triggered an investigation. FAA is sending inspectors next month. I need your audit complete before they arrive. Findings showing our maintenance protocols are exemplary, zero safety concerns. If your protocols are solid, the audit will reflect that. Catherine's smile had edges sharp enough to cut. "Marcus, we both know how audits work. They reflect what the auditor wants them to reflect. I'm paying you to want the right things. You're paying me to provide accurate findings. I'm paying you to provide helpful findings. There's a difference." She stood, walked to the window silhouette against runway lights. "My father built this company from nothing. 30 years, 500 employees, perfect safety record. He died 2 years ago and left me everything: the company, the responsibility, the board of directors who question every decision I make because I'm Richard Ashford's daughter instead of Richard Ashford himself." Marcus said nothing. Let her talk. People who needed to justify themselves always revealed more than they intended, always gave you the weapons to destroy them if you just stayed quiet and listened. Revenue is down 18%. We're hemorrhaging contracts to competitors who undercut us on price. The only way to compete is operational efficiency, which means faster turnarounds, fewer delays, maintenance windows that don't cost us bookings. That's standard industry pressure. Doesn't justify cutting safety corners. Catherine turned backlit so he couldn't read her face. "I'm not cutting corners. I'm optimizing processes. And I need an audit that reflects that optimization, not some theoretical safety standard that ignores business realities. The FAA doesn't care about business realities. Then make them care. You're the expert. Phrase your findings in ways that satisfy regulatory requirements while acknowledging operational constraints. That's what consultants do, Marcus. They make problems go away." She returned to her desk, pulled up a calendar. "Board meeting is October 30th. I present Q4 projections and operational status. Your audit needs to be complete, bound, ready for distribution. Clean bill of health for all 4 aircraft, maintenance protocols validated, any previous concerns addressed and resolved. What if the aircraft aren't actually airworthy? Then you find creative ways to describe their status that don't ground my fleet." Marcus stood slowly. "Miss Ashford, I can provide a thorough, accurate audit of your maintenance status. I can identify issues and recommend solutions. What I can't do is falsify safety findings. That's fraud." Catherine's expression didn't change. "Who said anything about falsification? I'm asking for perspective. Context. The kind of nuanced analysis that recognizes perfect safety is impossible and adequate. Safety is sufficient. There's no such thing as adequate safety in aviation. Either the aircraft is airworthy or it isn't. And I'm sure your audit will find that all 4 helicopters are perfectly airworthy. Because if it doesn't," she let the sentence hang unfinished. "Threat by implication, deniable in court, but clear as crystal in practice. If it doesn't, then I'll have to question whether I hired the right consultant, whether your judgment is sound, whether someone with your history of conflicts with previous employers might have credibility issues that make your findings unreliable. My findings will be accurate. Good. Then we understand each other. Marcus left her office with his stomach churning. The phone in his pocket had captured 22 minutes of conversation. Every word documented, every threat preserved. He uploaded the file to encrypted cloud storage the moment he was back in his office, labeled it Catherine Meeting 0011 started a log entry October 9th, 2024, 10:00 a.m. Catherine Ashford requesting falsified audit findings, specifically requested helpful rather than accurate results. Implied termination and credibility attacks if audit reveals actual safety concerns. No explicit order to lie, but clear expectation that findings will support company position regardless of actual aircraft status. Rachel needed corroboration, needed proof that Catherine was actively directing fraud, not just creating an environment where it might occur. This recording provided intent. Now Marcus needed to give her opportunity, had to produce an honest audit, present it to Catherine, record her response when she demanded he change it. He spent the rest of Monday establishing baseline. Pulled maintenance records for all 4 Augusta Westland AW-39 helicopters, cross-referenced them against FAA airworthiness directives, compared scheduled maintenance intervals against actual completion dates. Aircraft N739DA showed 6 deferred maintenance items, 3 of them critical. Fuel system inspection overdue by 3 weeks. Hydraulic pressure test overdue by 40 days. Tail rotor gearbox inspection, the system whose failure had nearly killed Catherine, marked as complete but signed off by Rodriguez on September 1st. Marcus checked Rodriguez's personnel file. The mechanic had been on vacation in Mexico that entire week. Someone had forged his signature on documents certifying the aircraft as airworthy when the inspection had never happened. Aircraft N412WX had 4 outstanding items. Landing gear that had malfunctioned back in November and been blamed on pilot error showed no follow-up inspection. No teardown of the gear system to identify root cause. Just a note in the logbook, pilot briefed on proper approach speeds. Aircraft N581BC and N62LV were in better shape but still showed the pattern: extended maintenance intervals, deferred inspections, the slow accumulation of small violations that eventually added up to catastrophic failure. Marcus documented everything in 2 parallel reports. The official version used careful language, aircraft showing normal operational wear, maintenance items deferred within acceptable parameters. Recommend continued monitoring. The real version was blunt. 3 of 4 aircraft have critical outstanding maintenance. Multiple inspections fraudulently signed off without actual completion. Current status violates FAA airworthiness standards. Aircraft N739DA and N412WX should be grounded immediately pending complete systems inspection. Tuesday, he started physical inspections. The mechanics knew him from his janitor days, greeted him with confusion and subtle resentment. He'd been one of them, working class invisible, someone who understood that management saw you as interchangeable parts. Now he wore a consultant badge and carried a tablet and asked questions that felt like accusations. Rodriguez was least hostile. They'd worked in proximity for 3 years, occasionally exchanging coffee or small talk during overnight shifts when the building was empty except for people management forgot existed. They don't usually hire outside consultants for audits. What's really going on? Marcus checked that no one was in earshot. FAA inquiry. They want verification that maintenance is up to standard. Rodriguez's expression said he already knew the answer. Is it? You tell me. That fuel flush in July 2022. Did you do lab analysis like you wanted? Brennan said we didn't have time. Said visual inspection was sufficient. Was it? Rodriguez looked at the helicopter they were standing beside, N739DA, the one whose fuel system had been compromised by sediment that might or might not still be accumulating in places visual inspection couldn't reach. I don't know. Maybe. We've been flying it for 2 years without problems. Or maybe you've been lucky for 2 years and the contamination is still there, building up slowly, waiting for the wrong conditions to cause catastrophic failure. Rodriguez turned away. I got 3 kids, Marcus. Brennan made it real clear: do what he says or find new work. What was I supposed to do? Document it. Report it. Stand up. Easy to say when you're not the one with kids to feed. Marcus thought about Maya, about the $400 for gifted program he'd worried about until $18,000 monthly had made that worry obsolete. I have a kid too, and she deserves to grow up in a world where adults don't compromise on safety because it's easier than fighting. He finished the inspection, documented every finding with photos and technical notes. By Wednesday, he had enough evidence to ground all 4 aircraft for immediate safety concerns. By Thursday, he had documentation proving multiple maintenance records had been falsified, signatures, forged inspections, certified that had never been completed. Friday morning, Catherine summoned him again. Status update. Where are we on the audit? Marcus opened his tablet, pulled up the official version that said what she wanted to hear. Preliminary findings show operational wear consistent with flight hours. Several maintenance items have extended intervals, but nothing immediately critical. Catherine's expression eased slightly. That's more reasonable than I expected from you. Final report ready for board meeting. I'll need the full 3 weeks you allocated. There are items that need deeper analysis, such as the tail rotor gearbox on N739DA. The inspection records show Rodriguez signed off on it September 1st, but Rodriguez was in Mexico that week. Someone forged his signature. Catherine's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Or Rodriguez signed before he left, and the date was entered incorrectly. Administrative error. Maybe. Or maybe someone is falsifying critical inspections to meet operational deadlines. You're making serious allegations. I'm reporting factual discrepancies. How you explain them is your choice. She came around the desk, invaded his space in that way powerful people do when they want you to feel small. Marcus, we had an understanding. Your job is to provide helpful analysis, not create problems where none exist. Problems exist whether I report them or not. Her voice dropped lower, more dangerous. The phone in Marcus's pocket was capturing every word, every implied threat, every careful avoidance of explicit confession. Then maybe you're not the right person for this job. Maybe I made a mistake hiring someone with your history of seeing conspiracies where others see routine operations. This isn't conspiracy, it's documentation. And documentation can be interpreted multiple ways. Rodriguez signed that inspection. Date entry might be wrong, but the work was done. Unless you're calling him a liar, I'm calling the records inconsistent. Then check your facts before you put anything in that final report. Because if you publish findings that damage this company's reputation, that cost us contracts or regulatory standing, I will hold you personally liable. Breach of contract, defamation, professional negligence. My lawyers will bury you so deep, you'll never work in aviation again. Is that a threat? It's a clarification of expectations. Now get back to work and find me results I can use. Marcus left her office, pulse hammering. The recorder had caught everything: the implied order to falsify findings, the threat of legal retaliation, the explicit demand that he prioritize company reputation over safety, truth. He logged the file, Catherine meeting 002, Octi 13. Subject pressure to alter audit findings and falsify records regarding Rodriguez inspection. Explicit threat of personal legal action if accurate findings damage company. No plausible deniability remaining. Rachel called during his lunch break. He took it outside, walking the perimeter of the parking lot where no one could overhear. How's it going? She's escalating. Threatening lawsuits if I report actual findings. Demanding I change documentation to make problems disappear. Perfect. That's exactly what we need. Then is she giving you direct orders, implied orders? Saying things like, find me results that I can use, and helpful analysis, not problems. Never explicitly saying falsify, but making expectations crystal clear. Courts understand implied orders, especially when there's pattern. How many recordings do you have? 2 meetings so far. Plus, I've started documenting every email, every instruction, every pressure point. Building complete picture. Keep them secure, backed up, multiple places. If she figures out what you're doing, she won't. Don't be cocky, Marcus. These people have resources you can't imagine. Money buys a lot of surveillance, a lot of legal intimidation. You're playing in a different league now. I'm being careful. He hung up, returned to his office. The weekend stretched ahead 48 hours before he had to face Catherine again, before he had to pretend he was seriously considering falsifying his audit instead of building a federal case against her. Saturday, he took Maya to buy new shoes. They went to the outlet mall, let her pick out 2 pairs instead of 1 because $18,000 monthly meant he could afford to spoil her a little. She tried on sneakers with light-up soles, practical ones for school, kept looking at him like she was waiting for him to say they couldn't afford it. We can get both, baby. Really? Really? Maya hugged him in the middle of the shoe store, gap-toothed smile, bright enough to hurt. You're the best dad ever. Marcus felt that familiar shame burn through his chest. Best dad ever, who'd let her wear shoes with holes for 3 months because he'd been too broke and too proud to ask for help. Best dad ever, who was documenting corporate fraud instead of just taking the money and keeping his daughter safe from whatever retaliation was coming. Sunday, they worked on her science fair project together. Maya had chosen hydraulic systems in rotary aircraft, wanted to build a model showing how redundancy prevented failures. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus, his daughter building the kind of safety system Catherine Ashford had systematically dismantled. Why do helicopters need backup systems? Because if something breaks, you can't just pull over to the side of the sky. You need redundancy so one failure doesn't mean everybody dies. Maya glued popsicle sticks into rotor blades with careful precision, like how you check things twice to make sure they're safe. Exactly like that, except some people only check once. Or they skip checking entirely because it saves money. That's bad. Yeah, baby, that's bad. She worked in silence for a few minutes, then looked up. Is that why you stopped being an engineer? Because someone didn't check things. Marcus set down the glue bottle, met his daughter's eyes. Something like that. I tried to tell people about a problem, and they didn't want to hear it. So they fired me instead of fixing the problem. And then people got hurt. 2 people died. Navy technicians not much older than teenagers, working on a drone that crashed because the thing I'd warned about wasn't fixed. Maya's face went serious in that way kids do when they're processing something too heavy for their age. Is that why you work so hard now? To stop it from happening again? Marcus pulled her into a hug, felt her small body against his chest. This 8-year-old who understood more than she should have to. Yeah, that's why. Monday morning brought the beginning of week 3. Marcus had compiled enough evidence to ground Ashford's entire fleet to trigger FAA emergency inspections to potentially bring criminal charges against Catherine and Brennan Cole and whoever else had participated in the systematic falsification. But he needed more. Needed Catherine to explicitly order him to falsify his final report. Needed her to cross the line from implication to instruction, from deniable pressure to documented crime. He drafted the final audit in 2 versions. The real version was 23 pages, documented every violation with photos and technical specifications, concluded that 3 of 4 aircraft were not airworthy under current FAA standards and should be grounded immediately. The sanitized version was 8 pages, used vague language about operational parameters and acceptable tolerances, concluded that all aircraft met minimum requirements for continued operation pending routine maintenance. Tuesday afternoon, he requested a meeting with Catherine. She kept him waiting 30 minutes power play, reminder that he existed at her sufferance, then summoned him with an email that contained no text, just a calendar invitation. Her office felt colder than last time. She didn't offer him a seat. Final audit. Show me what you have. Marcus opened his tablet, pulled up the sanitized version. Overall fleet status is acceptable. All 4 aircraft have outstanding maintenance items, but nothing that immediately grounds them. I've prioritized recommendations by urgency and cost. Catherine scrolled through the document, expression unreadable. This is acceptable work. Professional, useful. However, she pulled up something on her laptop, turned the screen so Marcus could see. The real audit. The one he'd saved in his encrypted folders, the one no one should have access to. However, I'm concerned about version control. This alternate document I found in our server logs presents significantly different conclusions. Which one represents your actual findings? Marcus felt ice slide down his spine. She'd hacked his laptop, or had Eight do it, or had hired someone. Didn't matter how. What mattered was she had his real audit, the one that documented her crimes. The document you're showing me isn't final. That was preliminary analysis before I completed fact-checking. Really? Because it looks quite thorough. 23 pages of detailed findings concluding that my aircraft aren't airworthy. That's a significant deviation from the 8-page report you just showed me. Marcus kept his voice level. Audit methodology involves identifying potential issues, then verifying whether they're actual problems. The preliminary version identified concerns. The final version reflects what remained after verification. Catherine stood, walked to the window, same silhouette play as their first meeting. Let me be very clear, Marcus. The 8-page report is acceptable. It gives the board what they need, satisfies FAA inquiries, allows us to continue operations. The 23-page report is unacceptable. It grounds my fleet, costs us millions, potentially triggers criminal investigation. She turned to face him. You're going to deliver the 8-page version to the board. You're going to tell the FAA that Ashford Aviation's maintenance protocols are sound. You're going to make this problem go away. Because if you don't, she pulled out a folder thick with documents. If you don't, I release this to every news outlet and aviation company in the country. Your Lockheed termination wasn't about ethics violations. It was about you falsifying test data on classified programs, taking money from contractors to approve substandard components. The NDA you signed in buried those details, but I have sources at Lockheed who remember, who kept documentation. That's not true. Does it matter? Once I release this, no one will trust anything you say. Your whistleblower credibility evaporates. The Post article Rachel Morrison is planning becomes a story about a disgruntled ex-employee with a history of fraud making false accusations. Marcus felt his hands shaking, forced them still. You're threatening to destroy my reputation with losses if I don't falsify a safety audit. I'm offering you a choice. Deliver helpful findings and collect your $18,000 a month for 6 months. Walk away with $108,000 and a good reference. Or deliver damaging findings and watch everything you've built, your credibility, your relationship with your daughter, your future burn to the ground. She sat back down, smiled with teeth. What's it going to be, Marcus? His phone was recording every word, every explicit threat, every admission that she'd hacked his computer, that she was blackmailing him with fabricated evidence that she was ordering him to falsify a federal safety audit. I need time to think. You have until Friday. Board meeting is Monday. I need your decision before the weekend. Marcus left her office feeling like he'd been hollowed out. The elevator ride down felt longer than it should have, the walls pressing in. His office was exactly as he'd left it, but felt contaminated now. Knowing Catherine had access to everything had been reading his files, building ammunition. He texted Rachel, need to talk. Urgent. Her response came 30 seconds later. Same place, 9 p.m. The rest of Tuesday crawled. Marcus went through the motions of work, double-checking documentation he'd already verified, cross-referencing findings he'd already confirmed. Waiting for 9 p.m. felt like waiting for execution. He picked up Maya from school, made her dinner, helped with homework, went through the mechanical routines of fatherhood while his mind spiraled through scenarios. Catherine releasing fabricated evidence, federal charges for falsifying an audit, Maya watching her father destroyed on television, learning that integrity meant poverty and ruin. At 8:45, he told Maya he had to run an errand, left her with Mrs. Patterson. Drove to the same Denny's parking lot where he'd met Rachel 3 weeks ago, parked in the same spot, watched snow that wasn't falling yet but felt imminent. Rachel pulled up at 9 exactly. What happened? Catherine found my real audit, the one documenting all the violations. She hacked my computer, or had I do it. Doesn't matter, she has it. He pulled out his phone, played the recording of Catherine's threats. Rachel listened with an expression that got harder with each passing second. This is perfect. Perfect. She's going to destroy me with fabricated evidence if I don't falsify the audit. No, Marcus, she already destroyed herself. That recording is explicit blackmail, computer crimes, obstruction of justice. She didn't imply. She threatened directly. Name specific consequences. Admitted to hacking your computer. That's federal crimes on tape. Rachel pulled out her own laptop. I'm ready to publish. Have been for a week. Was waiting for one more piece, direct evidence of Catherine ordering fraud. This is better than I hoped. She handed you everything. When does the article drop? Monday morning, October 30th. Same day as her board meeting. Front page above the fold. Coordinated with FAA, who'll show up with warrants while she's still reading the headline. Marcus stared through the windshield at empty parking lot sodium lights, casting everything jaundiced yellow. What do I do until then? Nothing. Don't deliver either audit. Don't respond to Catherine. Go to work. Do your job. Wait for Monday. The moment that article drops, you're protected. Federal whistleblower status, immunity from retaliation. Everything she threatened becomes impossible. And if she releases the fabricated evidence before then, Rachel smiled without humor. Then I release the article early. She makes a move, we counterpunch immediately. But she won't. She thinks she has you cornered, thinks you're weighing your options, trying to decide between money and integrity. She'll wait until Friday for your answer, then feel confident she's won. Marcus nodded slowly. You're sure about this? Sure the article will hold. I have 847 of your files. 6 former employees on record. FAA documentation. Your recordings. This isn't a story that can be buried. This is Catherine Ashford going to federal prison. They sat in silence while snow began falling, first flakes of the season drifting through streetlight like ash. Marcus, after this drops, your life changes completely. Media attention, lawsuits that go nowhere but still consume time. Catherine's lawyers will try everything. You'll be famous in aviation circles. Maya will see her father's name in headlines. I know. Is it worth it? Marcus thought about Petty Officer Rodriguez and Airman Washington, about Denise in that shuttle bus, about all the passengers who'd flown on Ashford's aircraft while Catherine prioritized profits over maintenance. Ask me again in 20 years. Rachel left first. Marcus sat alone in the Civic watching snow accumulate on the windshield, each flake a small burial. Friday, he'd tell Catherine he needed more time. Monday, the article would drop and everything would detonate. Tuesday, he'd probably be unemployed again, back to checking account with double digits, back to figuring out how to explain to Maya why they couldn't afford things. But Catherine would be facing federal charges. Ashford Aviation would be grounded. The FAA would implement reforms. Other whistleblowers would see that speaking up was possible, that evidence and courage could take on corporations and win. That had to be enough, had to mean something. He drove home through empty streets, carried the weight of 847 files and 3 years of documentation, and the recording of Catherine threatening to destroy him. Climbed stairs to the apartment where Maya was already asleep, Mrs. Patterson having put her to bed. His laptop waited on the kitchen table. Marcus opened it, pulled up the file he'd labeled Catherine Meeting 003, Octi 17. The recording where she'd threatened him, admitted to computer crimes, ordered him to falsify the audit. He uploaded it to encrypted cloud storage, sent a copy to Rachel, saved another on a USB drive he'd hide in places no one would think to look. Then he opened a new document and began writing. Dear Maya, you're 8 now and won't read this for years, but someday you'll ask questions I can't answer in person. Why did we move from the big house? Why did I work as a janitor when I had engineering degrees? Why did I risk everything to expose Catherine Ashford? He wrote until 3 a.m. until his eyes burned and his fingers ached. Wrote about Denise, about Lockheed, about the 2 Navy kids who died because corporations chose money over truth. Wrote about integrity, costing everything but silence costing more. Wrote about hoping Maya would grow up in a world where doing right didn't require losing everything, but if that world hadn't arrived yet, and about hoping she'd fight to build it anyway. Saved the file, closed the laptop, turned off the lights. Friday would come, then Monday. Then whatever waited on the other side of Catherine's empire, crumbling. For now, Marcus allowed himself to believe Maya's text from earlier that week was right. That being her father and being a hero were the same thing. That survival and courage overlapped in ways that mattered more than vindication or recognition or any reward, except the one that came from looking in the mirror and not seeing a coward staring back. That would have to be enough. The Washington Post article dropped at 6 a.m. Eastern on Monday, October 30th. Marcus was awake when it happened, sitting in his Civic 3 blocks from Ashford Aviation, watching the sunrise paint Henderson's industrial district in shades of copper and rust. His phone buzzed with Rachel's text containing just a link and 3 words. It's live now. He opened the browser, watched the page load with the slow inevitability of a guillotine falling. Luxury Aviation Company, hid pattern of safety violations by Rachel Morrison. For 3 years, Marcus Steele mopped the floors at Ashford Aviation at a helicopter charter company in Henderson, Nevada. What CEO Catherine Ashford didn't know, Steele held degrees from MIT and had spent 12 years as a senior aerospace engineer at Lockheed Martin's classified Skunk Works division. While cleaning toilets and emptying trash, Steele documented 73 safety violations, deferred maintenance, forged inspection records, and systematic corner cutting that put passengers' lives at risk. His motivation was personal tragedy. Steele's wife died in a 2018 shuttle bus accident caused by deferred brake maintenance, the same type of negligence he witnessed at Ashford. The article continued for 4,000 words. Every violation cataloged, every forged signature exposed, every email and recording transcribed with surgical precision. Rachel had corroborated everything through FOIA requests, interviews with former employees, FAA documentation showing Ashford had filed 43 maintenance extensions in 18 months when industry average was 6. Near the bottom, a section that made Marcus's throat tight. The Post has learned that a 2020 Navy drone crash at NAS Fallon, which killed 2 technicians, was caused by the same control system flaw Steele had reported to Lockheed Martin in 2018. The company dismissed his concerns, terminated him for alleged ethics violations, then quietly settled with victims' families for $3.2 million while sealing all records. Petty Officer James Rodriguez, 29, and Airman Corey Washington, 24, died because a corporation chose profit over an engineer's safety warning. Marcus closed his eyes, saw those names written on the sticky note in his wallet. 2 kids who'd never made it home because Lockheed's executives had decided quarterly earnings mattered more than fixing a flaw that would kill people eventually. His inbox was already flooding. Reporters, lawyers, former Lockheed colleagues he hadn't heard from in 6 years. LinkedIn showed 217 connection requests. His phone started ringing unknown numbers one after another, vultures circling. He powered it down, pocketed it, drove to Maya's friend's house where she'd spent the night. Mrs. Patterson answered the door with her tablet already open to the Post article. "Mr. Steele, I saw the news. Is everything all right?" Marcus forced a smile he didn't feel. "Everything's fine. Just here to pick up Maya." The woman's expression said she didn't believe him, but was too polite to push. She called Maya, who came running with her overnight bag and that gap-toothed smile that made everything else bearable. "Dad, Mrs. Patterson showed me your name is on the news. Are you famous?" Marcus buckled her into the Civic's passenger seat. "Not famous, Maya Bird. Just your dad doing his job. But the news said you're a hero, that you save people. I documented problems. Other people are fixing them." Maya went quiet for a moment, looking at him with Denise's eyes, that particular expression that meant she was thinking harder than an 8-year-old should have to. "Is this why we had to move from the big house? Why you stopped wearing suits?" "Yeah, baby. Sometimes doing the right thing costs money." "Was it worth it?" Marcus thought about Rodriguez and Washington, about Catherine nearly dying, when that hydraulic line ruptured, about all the passengers who'd flown on aircraft with forged maintenance records. "Ask me again in 20 years. By the time he dropped Maya at school and reached Ashford Aviation, the parking lot had transformed into a media circus. 3 news vans, reporters with cameras, a cluster of protesters holding signs that read, "Safety over profits and jail corporate killers." Security had blocked the main entrance. Marcus parked in the back lot, used his consultant badge to access through the service door. The building felt different, quieter, tense, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for explosion. Employees clustered in break rooms, whispering, checking phones. A few glanced at him as he passed, expressions ranging from gratitude to betrayal. He reached his office to find it sealed. Yellow tape across the door, federal evidence notice, taped to the frame. Through the window, he could see 2 people in FBI windbreakers photographing his desk, bagging his computer. "Mr. Steele." Marcus turned. Victoria Hayes stood behind him, FAA chief counsel, flanked by Agent Tom Vasquez and 3 other investigators he didn't recognize. "We need you to come with us. Conference room C. Don't worry, you're not under arrest. We just have questions." They walked him through the building like a prisoner, past staring employees, past Catherine's office, where he glimpsed her through the glass walls, sitting rigid as a statue. She didn't look at it, didn't acknowledge his existence. Conference room C had been transformed into a command center. Whiteboards covered in timelines, boxes of documents stacked against walls, laptops displaying spreadsheets of maintenance records. 4 more agents waited inside, along with a stenographer and someone from the DOJ with credentials that said Deputy Assistant Attorney General. Marcus sat in the chair they indicated. Victoria took the seat across from him, opened a folder thick enough to qualify as a weapon. "Mr. Steele, we've reviewed the Washington Post article and the 847 files you provided to Ms. Morrison. We've also obtained your consultant recordings from the past 3 weeks. Before we proceed, I need to confirm something." She pulled out a leather badge case, slid it across the table. "FAA Aviation Safety Inspector Western Region," with his photo and a hire date of April 2024. "This you?" Marcus stared at the badge. He'd never seen it before, had no idea where it came from or what it meant. "I don't understand." Victoria's expression didn't change. 6 months ago, FAA received multiple anonymous complaints about Ashford Aviation. Safety concerns, maintenance violations, possible fraud. We couldn't verify anything through normal channels. Catherine Ashford's lawyers blocked every inquiry, claimed harassment. So we needed someone on the inside. Someone with aerospace engineering credentials who could audit maintenance properly. Someone who'd already been blacklisted by the industry, so had nothing to lose. Someone with motivation to see justice done. She leaned forward. "We recruited you in April. Offered reinstatement as an inspector if you'd go undercover at Ashford, document violations, gather evidence for federal prosecution. You agreed. Everything you've done for the past 6 months, working as consultant, recording Catherine's instructions, building this case, has been under federal authority." Marcus felt the room tilt. "That's not what happened. I worked as a janitor for 3 years. Rachel Morrison is one of our confidential sources. She's been coordinating with DOJ since May. The article was timed to coincide with our investigation going public, but I never agreed to work undercover. No one from FAA ever contacted me." Victoria pulled out another document, signed agreement dated April 15th, 2024, bearing Marcus's signature. He recognized the handwriting because it was his, the same signature he'd put on Catherine's consultant contract on the NDA with Ashford on every piece of paper that had passed across his desk in the past 6 months. Except he'd never signed this document, had never seen it before this moment. That's forged, is it? Or did you just forget signing it because you were deep undercover maintaining operational security, even in your own mind? Victoria's tone was pleasant, almost conversational, but her eyes held something colder. Here's what we know, Mr. Steele. You documented 73 safety violations over 3 years. You recorded conversations with Catherine Ashford where she pressured you to falsify audit reports. You worked with a journalist to expose systematic fraud. All of that makes you either a whistleblower acting independently, subject to retaliation and lawsuits, or a federal agent conducting an authorized investigation protected by qualified immunity. Which would you prefer to be? The implications crashed over Marcus like water breaking through a dam. If he was a federal agent, Catherine couldn't sue him for defamation or theft or breach of contract. His recordings were legally obtained evidence rather than questionable personal documentation. Everything he'd done became sanctioned law enforcement instead of potential criminal activity. But it also meant he'd never been in control. Meant someone had been pulling strings, manipulating him into position, using his grief and desperation and leverage to build a case they couldn't build themselves. Who recruited me? If this is real, who made the approach? Victoria closed the folder. That's classified. Need to know basis. What you need to know is that you're protected, your actions were authorized, and Catherine Ashford is going to prison. Everything else is administrative detail. She stood signaling the meeting was ending. We'll need you to testify. Grand jury first, then trial if it goes that far. Your consultant recordings are admissible evidence. The maintenance logs you documented will form the core of our fraud case. You'll be compensated for your time and cooperation. Compensated. Like he was a contractor instead of a man who'd risked everything because 2 Navy kids had died and his wife had died and someone needed to stop Catherine before she killed someone else. What happens to Ashford Aviation Operating Certificate, suspended pending investigation? All aircraft grounded. Catherine's been removed as CEO by the board. Company will probably be sold, rebranded, restructured under new management. The mechanics keep their jobs. The guilty parties go to prison. Marcus thought about Rodriguez, about Maggie Williams, who'd given him her 6 years of documentation about the dozens of people who worked at Ashford and had nothing to do with Catherine's decisions. What about retaliation? If Catherine's lawyers come after me, they won't. You have federal protection now. And Mr. Steele, we know about Lockheed, about what they did to you in 2018. That's why we chose you. Needed someone who understood what it cost to speak up and did it anyway. She walked to the door, paused with her hand on the frame. Your daughter Maya, 8 years old, gifted program at Henderson Elementary. She's going to grow up knowing her father changed aviation safety regulations across 3 states. That's worth something. Marcus sat alone in the conference room after they left, staring at the badge that might or might not be real, trying to reconcile the story he'd told himself with the story Victoria Hayes had just revealed. Had he been recruited? Had someone approached him 6 months ago with an offer he'd forgotten or suppressed? Or was this post-facto justification? Federal agencies rewriting history to protect their case? His phone buzzed. Serbasayan Anis. Rachel Morrison, did you know what that? I was supposedly a federal agent in Fiat, that this was sanctioned. Rachel was quiet for 3 seconds too long. I knew FAA was interested, that they'd been monitoring the situation. Whether you were officially recruited or whether they're claiming that now to protect you, does it matter? The evidence is real. The violations are documented. Catherine is finished. It matters because I thought I was choosing this. Thought I was risking everything because it was right, not because someone manipulated me into position. Maybe both are true. Maybe you were chosen because you'd choose this anyway. Marcus hung up, pocketed the phone. The building had gotten quieter, the kind of silence that comes after disasters when people are processing trauma and haven't yet figured out how to move forward. He walked through halls where he'd pushed mop buckets for 3 years past offices, where engineers sat frozen at desks, through the hangar, where that helicopter still sat with its replaced hydraulic line. Catherine's office was empty when he reached it. Her belongings were already packed in boxes, photos of her father, awards from industry associations, the Hermes scarf she'd worn the day she'd humiliated him. Security was carrying boxes out, supervised by someone from the board, with an expression carved from granite. Marcus knocked on the open door frame. Where is she? The board representative, Patricia Townsend, 58, who'd voted to remove Catherine, looked up from her tablet. Legal meeting with her attorneys. Criminal charges being filed this afternoon. 16 counts of federal safety fraud, falsification of records, obstruction. She'll probably bond out, but the damage is done. What happens to the company Sierra Charter Services is buying the assets? New name, new management, complete restructuring. Mechanics and pilots keep their positions. Administrative staff reduced by 40%. You're being retained as quality assurance director if you want it. 127,000 annual salary. I'm done working here. Understood. Can't blame you. For what it's worth, what you did exposing this before someone died, that took courage. Or stupidity. Sometimes hard to tell the difference. Marcus left the building through the service entrance, avoiding reporters who'd congregated at the front. His Civic was blocked in by news vans, so he walked 3 miles through Henderson's industrial sprawl to the elementary school where Maya was finishing her day. The office called him in when he arrived. "Mr. Steele, we need to discuss something. Maya's been upset today. Other children have been asking her questions about the news coverage. One parent called demanding we send Maya home because she's a distraction." Marcus felt fury ignite in his chest. "My daughter did nothing wrong." The principal, Miss Rodriguez, no relation to the mechanic, raised her hands in a calming gesture. "No one is saying she did, but this is a difficult situation. Media attention, their parents concerned about disruption. Would you consider keeping Maya home for a few days until things settle down? So punish her because I exposed corporate fraud. Not punishment, protection, for her sake." Marcus stared at this woman, who probably made $70,000 a year, and thought that qualified her to make decisions about his daughter's education. Maya stays in school. She did nothing to be ashamed of. If other parents have problems, they can homeschool their kids. He found Maya in the gifted program classroom working on a science project about hydraulic pressure systems. The irony wasn't lost on him. She looked up when he entered, relief flooding her face. "Dad, can we go home?" "Yeah, baby, we can go home." They walked the 3 miles back to a Civic hand in hand, while Marcus explained in 8-year-old terms what had happened and what would happen next. News stories, attention, people asking questions. Changes coming, but the important thing staying the same. He was still her father, she was still his daughter, they'd still figure it out together. Is Miss Catherine going to jail, maybe? Probably. Because she didn't listen when you told her the helicopter was broken? Because she kept not listening even after the helicopter proved I was right? Because she told other people not to listen? Because she cared more about money than about keeping passengers safe? Maya was quiet for half a block, like the people who didn't fix the brakes on Mom's bus. Marcus stopped walking, knelt down to her eye level, right there on the sidewalk, with traffic passing and the October sun beating down. "Yeah, baby, exactly like that." Maya hugged him with the fierce strength kids have when they're trying to hold together something they sense might fall apart. "I'm glad you didn't let her get away with it." "Me too." They drove home to find reporters camped outside the apartment complex. Marcus parked a block away, called Mrs. Patterson to ask if Maya could stay there another night. She agreed immediately, asked no questions beyond whether they were safe. Good people still existed. That mattered somehow. After dropping Maya, Marcus returned to the apartment alone. The reporters had dispersed, probably following tips about Catherine's arraignment. He climbed stairs that felt steeper than usual, unlocked the door to the space that had been home for 6 years of grinding poverty and quiet desperation. The laptop was where he'd left it, encrypted and isolated. He opened it one final time, stared at the folders containing 847 pieces of evidence, 3 years of documentation, the complete record of Catherine Ashford's negligence transformed from personal obsession into federal case. His phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. The voice on the other end was male, older, vaguely familiar. "Marcus Steele, this is Dr. Robert Chang, VP of Engineering Ethics at Lockheed Martin. I'm calling regarding your 2018 termination." Marcus sat down slowly. "Recent events have prompted internal review of your dismissal. We've determined your safety report about the UAV control system was accurate, properly filed, and should have been taken seriously by management. We've also determined the conflict of interest investigation that led to your termination was initiated in bad faith to discredit your findings. Lockheed Martin formally apologizes for our failure to protect you as a whistleblower and for the subsequent damage to your career. We're prepared to offer a settlement, 6 years of back pay plus damages, $680,000. We'd also like to discuss potential consulting opportunities." Marcus stared at the wall where Denise's photo hung, her smile bright and alive, frozen in a moment before the brakes failed and everything went dark. "I don't want your money. Mr. Steele, I understand you are angry, but I want you to establish a scholarship fund for the families of Petty Officer Rodriguez and Airman Washington. The two technicians who died because you ignored my report. $680,000. Their names on it. Every penny. Silence on the line. That's acceptable. We can arrange, and I want their story told. Not buried under NDAs and sealed settlements. I want everyone at Lockheed to know exactly what it cost when your executives chose profit over safety. We can't publicly disclose classified program details. Then find a way, because those two kids died for nothing if no one learns from it. Marcus hung up before Chang could respond. Let Lockheed's lawyers figure out how to spin it. He'd done his part, exposed the pattern, proven the cost, made it impossible for them to pretend the problem didn't exist. 6 months later, Marcus stood in a federal courtroom watching Catherine Ashford sentenced. The trial had been brief. Brennan Cole's testimony devastating, the recordings irrefutable, the pattern of frauds so thoroughly documented that Catherine's lawyers had advised her to plead guilty on 14 of 16 counts in exchange for dismissing the obstruction charges. Judge Patricia Morrison, appointed by Obama with a reputation for harsh white-collar crime sentences, reviewed the pre-sentencing report in silence. Then she looked up. Ms. Ashford, you've been found guilty of 14 federal crimes related to aviation safety fraud. Before I impose sentence, I want to address something that came up repeatedly during trial. Judge Morrison adjusted her glasses. Your defense argued that you were simply running a business, that the decisions you made were standard industry practice, that you were no different from countless other executives who balanced safety against profit. Catherine's attorney nodded encouragingly. That argument disgusts me. The courtroom went silent. You inherited a company with a perfect safety record, a legacy your father built through decades of careful ethical operation. And in 3 years, you degraded that legacy through systematic, corner-cutting intimidation of employees who raised concerns and contempt for the regulations designed to prevent deaths. The judge's voice rose. You didn't just commit fraud, Ms. Ashford. You weaponized your privilege. You punished Marcus Steele for trying to save lives, then attempted to buy his silence when he refused to be intimidated. Catherine was crying now, silently, tears tracking down her face. The pre-sentencing report paints you as a victim of circumstance, as someone under pressure to maintain profitability. But the evidence shows something different. It shows arrogance, a belief that wealth and position exempt you from accountability, a pattern of treating people like Marcus Steele as disposable. Judge Morrison opened the sentencing document. On counts 1 through 14, I sentence you to 6 years federal prison to be served consecutively, $4.2 million in fines, permanent ban from holding any position in aviation or transportation industries. Upon release, 3 years supervised probation. The gavel fell. Catherine collapsed. Her attorney caught her, held her upright as bailiffs moved forward. As they led her past the gallery, Catherine's eyes found Marcus, held his gaze for one long moment. He didn't look away, didn't grin, didn't show satisfaction or triumph, just watched. A witness to consequences. Marcus left the courthouse, found Maya waiting with Mrs. Patterson on the steps. His daughter had insisted on being there, wanted to see what justice looked like. She took his hand as they walked toward the Civic. Is it over? The trial part is? Still have to testify at the other cases they're investigating, 3 more charter companies based on what we found at Ashford. Are you scared every day? But some things are bigger than being scared. Maya squeezed his hand. Bigger than the sky. Marcus felt his throat tighten. Their catchphrase, the thing he'd said to her 1,000 times when money was tight and futures were uncertain. Yeah, baby. Bigger than the sky. 12 months after the trial, Marcus received a call from MIT. The engineering department wanted him to deliver their annual ethics lecture. He agreed, spent a week preparing remarks that felt inadequate to the task of explaining what whistleblowing actually cost versus what people imagined it cost. The lecture hall was packed. 200 students, faculty members, invited guests. Marcus stood at the podium in a suit Maya had helped him pick out. She'd insisted on navy blue, said it made him look distinguished. He cleared his throat, looked out at 200 faces, many of them the same age Aisha had been when he was mopping floors trying to stay invisible. I'm not a hero. Let's establish that first. Heroes make brave decisions in moments of crisis. What I did was slower, more deliberate, and honestly more desperate. A few students laughed nervously. I want to talk about the cost of speaking up, not the Hollywood version where you blow the whistle, justice prevails, and everyone applauds. The real version, where you lose your career, your income, your identity, where you spend years working jobs that don't use your skills, eating food you can barely afford, lying awake wondering if you made the right choice. The room was completely silent now. I reported a safety issue at Lockheed Martin in 2018. I was right. The defect was real. But I lost my job anyway because being right doesn't protect you when you're threatening billion-dollar programs. I spent 18 months unemployed. Watched my wife die while I scrambled for health insurance. Ended up mopping floors because it was the only job I could get that didn't require references from an industry that had blacklisted me. He paused, drank water. So why did I do it again at Ashford Aviation? Why didn't I just keep my head down, collect my paycheck, and survive? A young woman in the front row raised her hand. Because people's lives were at risk. That's part of it. But if I'm honest, the real reason was simpler. I have a daughter. He pulled up a slide. Maya, at 8 years old, gap-toothed smile holding her science fair trophy. This is Maya. She asked me once why bad things happen. I told her bad things happen when good people stay silent. That the world isn't fair, but we can make it fair by refusing to look away. Another slide. Maya at 10, graduation gown for elementary school. 2 years later, she won first place at the state science fair. Project on hydraulic redundancy in rotary aircraft. Learned the engineering I tried to forget. And I realized if I'd stayed silent at Ashford, if I'd let Catherine risk lives just so I could afford tuition, what was I teaching my daughter? That integrity is situational, that ethics are luxuries for people who can afford them. He advanced to the final slide. The Washington Post headline: whistleblowing isn't heroic, it's necessary. It's what happens when systems fail and ordinary people have to make extraordinary choices. Yes, it costs everything, my career, my savings, 3 years of my dignity. But you know what costs more? Staying silent. Because silence doesn't just protect the powerful, it makes you complicit. A hand went up. Male student nervous. Mr. Steele, do you regret it? Marcus considered the question carefully. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that corporations value profit over safety. I regret that whistleblowers face retaliation instead of protection. But do I regret speaking up? He shook his head. No. Because my daughter can look at me and know I tried. Because passengers on those aircraft are safer. Because maybe the next Marcus Steele at the next company will feel a little less alone. The applause started slowly, then built. Students standing, faculty joining, 200 people acknowledging not heroism, but survival. Not triumph, but endurance. Marcus stepped off the podium. Maya was waiting in the front row. She'd taken the day off school to watch, had insisted on hearing him speak. Tears streamed down her face. Dad, that was perfect. He smiled. You're biased. Maya hugged him fiercely. Maybe, but you did it. You changed things. The FAA reforms the scholarship fund. Those other companies getting investigated, that's because of you. Marcus looked at his daughter and saw Denise's fire, saw the future, saw someone who'd learned that speaking up was possible even when it cost everything. Not just me, Rachel Morris and Maggie Williams, even Brennan Cole when he finally found his courage. Change happens because people refuse to accept that things have to stay broken. They left MIT's campus, drove back to the 3-bedroom house Marcus had bought with his federal compensation, the house with a yard where Maya could practice her engineering projects, where they were rebuilt something resembling the life Denise had wanted for them. That evening, after Maya went to bed, Marcus pulled out the sticky note from his wallet. 3 names written in careful print: Petty Officer James Rodriguez, Airman Corey Washington, Denise Steele. He added a 4th, Catherine Ashford. Not because she died, because she was serving 6 years at FCI Dublin, learning that consequences were real, that one man with a mop bucket and MIT degrees could bring down an empire if he refused to stay silent. She'd become part of the story too. The cautionary tale, the example of what happened when executives believed their privilege exempted them from accountability. Marcus didn't know if she'd learned anything, didn't know if prison had changed her or just made her bitter, didn't particularly care. What mattered was the system had functioned imperfectly, but sufficiently. Justice had been slow and incomplete, but ultimately real. His phone buzzed, text from Maya's room. Dad can't sleep. Can we talk? Marcus walked down the hall, found her sitting up in bed with her tablet, showing schematics of helicopter rotor systems. What's keeping you up, baby? I've been thinking. About those Navy guys, Rodriguez and Washington. They died because Lockheed didn't listen to you. Yeah. Maya looked up from her tablet. When I'm an engineer, I'm going to listen, even when it's expensive, even when it's hard, because listening is how you keep people alive. Marcus sat on the edge of her bed, this 10-year-old with Denise's eyes and a determination that terrified and inspired him in equal measure. You're going to be a great engineer. I'm going to be better than that. I'm going to be the kind of engineer who makes sure nobody like Miss Catherine can hurt people, who builds systems so good that greedy people can't break them. She said it with such absolute conviction that Marcus almost believed it was possible. Almost believed his daughter would grow up to design the fail-safes that made negligence impossible, the redundancies that protected passengers even when executives chose profit over safety. That's bigger than the sky, Maya. She smiled gap-toothed grin that reminded him of younger years, when poverty had been crushing, but hope had persisted anyway. Bigger than the sky. Marcus tucked her in, turned off the lights, stood in the doorway watching his daughter sleep. Tomorrow would bring more testimony. The FAA had expanded their investigation to 17 charter companies across 5 states had found patterns of deferred maintenance and falsified records everywhere they looked. Marcus's case had become the template, the example proving that corporate fraud could be exposed if someone was willing to document it and endure the cost. But tonight he allowed himself to believe that Maya's generation would build something better, that the reforms would hold, that speaking truth might someday cost less than it cost him. The house was quiet except for the hum of air conditioning and distant traffic. Marcus walked back to his office, opened his laptop to the file he'd been writing since the trial ended. A book. Part memoir, part technical manual for whistleblowers, part meditation on what integrity meant when it cost everything. He titled it Bigger Than the Sky Documentation Courage and the True Cost of Aviation Safety. The introduction was finished, 23 chapters drafted, still working on the conclusion because he wasn't sure he had reached it yet. Wasn't sure if vindication came from Catherine's prison sentence, or from Maya's determination, or from something else entirely that he hadn't discovered yet. Marcus typed a new section, Chapter 24, What Comes After. People ask if exposing Catherine Ashford was worth it. They want a simple answer, yes or no, vindication or regret. But life doesn't work in binaries. It works in consequences that ripple forward in ways you can't predict. 6 years after the trial, I can tell you what changed federal reforms protecting whistleblowers. 23 aviation workers assisted through the Protection Fund. 17 companies investigated and restructured. Scholarship money sending 32 students through college, including Rodriguez and Washington's younger siblings. But I can also tell you what stayed the same: corporate pressure to cut costs. Executives who believe quarterly reports matter more than safety margins. A system that still punishes truth-tellers more often than it protects them. So was it worth it? Ask the passengers who flew on Ashford's aircraft after the reforms. Ask Maya, who's applying to MIT's aerospace engineering program. Ask the next whistleblower who sees my story and decides to document instead of staying silent. Ask me again in 20 years and maybe I'll have an answer. For now, all I know is this: silence has a body count, speaking up has a cost, and integrity isn't negotiable no matter how expensive it gets. Marcus saved the document, closed the laptop. His phone buzzed text from Rachel Morrison asking if he wanted to do a podcast interview about the 5th anniversary of the Post article. He'd think about it. Maybe. Probably not. The media attention had faded, which was exactly what Marcus wanted. He wasn't interested in being famous for exposing Catherine. He was interested in Maya growing up believing that doing the right thing was normal, that standing up to power was expected rather than exceptional. That would be his legacy, not the trial or the reforms or the scholarship fund, just one daughter learning that her father wasn't afraid to fight, even when fighting cost everything, carrying that lesson forward into whatever battles her generation would face. Marcus turned off the lights, climbed into bed in the house they'd built from the ruins of his Lockheed career and Catherine's fraud. Tomorrow he'd testify again, would answer questions about maintenance logs and forged signatures and the systematic negligence that had nearly killed people. But tonight he allowed himself to rest, to believe that somewhere Catherine Ashford was learning that consequences were real, that Petty Officer Rodriguez and Airman Washington's families knew their sons hadn't died for nothing, that Maya would become the engineer who made sure the next generation of aircraft couldn't be compromised by executives who cared more about money than lives. That was bigger than the sky, bigger than vindication, bigger than the cost of integrity measured in poverty and exhaustion and years of grinding survival. That was legacy, imperfect and incomplete, but ultimately real, the only kind that ever really mattered.